You see, the point of writing this book was this. If I could work out what explained, what caused the Great Divergence, then I could decide if it's over. And that's the real question. Is it over? Are we the generation that is going to preside over the end of Western predominance? Is that our strange fate? After 500 years of exponential divergence, is it our lot to live through the great reconvergence? I believe it is. I believe it is not because of any elaborate projections that I need you to believe in. It is the case already that the gap has dramatically narrowed between the West and the rest. It's not a projection, it's happened. Remember in 1978, when I was still listening to the Sex Pistols, the average American was 20 times, at least 20 times richer than the average Chinese. Today, it's less than 5 times. And I'm not that much older. My musical taste has improved something. It's not an enormously distant projection that the International Monetary Fund makes in its most recent World Economic Outlook. It says that China's gross domestic product will overtake that of the United States in 5 years' time. Not in 2050, in 2016. And what I try and argue in effect, the final part of the book, is that on all the different measures, in the case of each of the 6 killer apps, the Great Divergence is ending. And it's ending for an incredibly straightforward reason that follows with beautiful logic from the rest of my argument. They've downloaded our apps. Because it turns out that the institutions and ideas that I've described to you, ranging from competition through the scientific revolution to the work ethic, were open source software. Anybody could download them. Anybody could copy them. The first society to get this was Japan's. Japan was the first non-Western society systematically to imitate Western institutions and ideas, beginning in the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century. It worked. It worked so well that in the space of a generation, Japan became one of the most dynamic industrial economies in the world, the second largest exporter in textiles after Britain on the eve of World War I. In our time, what has happened is that the most populous countries in the world, the great Asian giants, China, then India, and also the giants of the southern hemisphere, Brazil, have done the same thing. They've copied our institutions and ideas. They've downloaded our apps. And I don't begrudge them that at all. In fact, I think it's a cause for celebration. Hundreds of millions of people have been pulled out of poverty in China and in India since this process got underway in the late 1970s. It is, in the end, a cause for celebration. What is not a cause for celebration is the simultaneous process that troubles me far more. And that is that we appear to be intent on deleting the killer apps, even as they download them. Because yes, you can delete good ideas and institutions. Or even if you don't delete them, you can cause them to work so slowly that it feels like there must be a virus on the hard drive. You probably, like me, have had a period in your life when your personal computer has run very slowly because you haven't yet switched to a Mac. And you get up in the morning and you boot your machine, and then you have to go and have a cup of coffee, take the dog for a walk, and you come back and there's still a little hourglass on the screen and a strange fan noise emanating from it. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to suggest that that describes the way Western civilization currently functions. We may still have the software, but it's running painfully slowly. We haven't updated it. There are viruses on the hard drive. What do I mean by that? Let me illustrate very briefly what I mean, and then open this up to discussion. Competition, I said, was a killer app. Well, we can measure competitiveness quite accurately today. The World Economic Forum does it. Each year they have a global competitiveness index, which I urge you to study, not least because it's such an enormous exercise in gathering data on all dimensions of economic activity around the world. If you look at the Global Competitiveness Index, since they changed the methodology in 2004, the biggest decline in the index among major economies is that of the United States. And the biggest increase in the competitiveness index is, of course, China. Or take that second killer app, science. Now, it's true that the Nobel Prizes still have a way of coming to institutions, or people who work in institutions in the United States. But the people who get Nobel Prizes are old guys. The real question is, how are our teenagers getting on at science? The OECD does something called the PISA test. It's a standardized test of literacy, numeracy, and scientific knowledge for 15-year-olds. The last time they did it, which I think was in 2009, for the first time, they included non-OECD countries, including China. The figures for the Shanghai district of China are startling, because the 15-year-olds there came top in the world for numeracy, and by quite some margin. Next, Singapore. Somewhere down the ranking, you find the United States and the United Kingdom and the other English-speaking countries. The gap between the Shanghai district and the United States is as big as the gap between the United States and Albania or Tunisia. That scares me. How many lawyers are here tonight? Put your hand up if you're a lawyer. So the rule of law is a wonderful thing. But the rule of lawyers is not. You know what the rule of lawyers means? The rule of lawyers means a piece of legislation roughly 2,000 pages long, full of such incredible ambiguities that hundreds, nay thousands, nay tens of thousands of lawyers will earn untold millions in fees trying to explain to compliance departments what the hell it means. That's the rule of lawyers. I think the rule of law is hugely important. It's a more important killer app than democracy. We shouldn't delude ourselves about that. Anybody can hold an election. Anybody can have a universal suffrage-based election. They happen in Venezuela, but they don't have the rule of law there. But how well does the rule of law really function here in what should be its heartland? The answer is not well. I looked down deep into the World Economic Forum data. I was really interested to know the answer to this question. I wanted to find out how the US ranks in terms of the effectiveness of the rule of law. And there are 16 different ways that the World Economic Forum measures this, based on survey data of executives around the world. 16 different measures of the effectiveness of the rule of law. Do you know, the United States is only in the top 10 for one. And for all the rest, it ranks somewhere from the mid-30s into the early 80s in the world. Hong Kong scores much better on 15 out of 16 measures. If you want to start a new company, and you want to be free of burdensome regulation and onerous litigation, don't do it here. Do it in Hong Kong. Now, I could go on in this vein, but I don't want you to become depressed or angry. Or maybe a bit angry. The point I want to make to you is that we can't address these problems. There's no predestined decline that lies in our future. Our fate is in our own hands. The lesson of history is that institutions can be changed. They can be improved. You can delete the viruses of corruption, of vested interests, and make institutions work again. It's perfectly doable because they're man-made institutions. It's not the weather, it's not destiny, it's not in our DNA, it's just about making the killer apps work again. And I passionately believe that we could do that. And we must do it. Because the alternative is not gentle decline into some kind of civilizational old age. The final point I want to make tonight is that that's not how history works. You don't get gentle decline. People, individuals, sometimes get gentle decline. I think I'm probably gently declining now. That's the human life cycle that begins with vigorous childhood and youth, reaches a plateau around about where I am now, and then I'm afraid it's all downhill, old age, retirement, and you know the rest. That's not what happens to civilizations. Fascinatingly, the way in which complex organizations, complex adaptive systems made by man behave is completely different. They don't grow like that, they grow exponentially like that. And they don't decline like that. No, they collapse. Very suddenly, very dramatically, they tip over the edge of chaos. You're fine in this world until you're not fine. If you don't believe me, remember the fate of the Soviet Union. Remember what happened to our glorious financial system of which we were once so unreasonably proud. Think of the North African dictators. A year ago they felt secure in their palaces. Now, under arrest, or dead, or fighting brutally for their lives. No, history is very non-linear, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't move in gentle curves. Sometimes things just collapse. They plunge over the edge. And that brings me back to Athens and Rome. The architects of Europe's monetary union ignored history. 10 years ago, in a book called The Cash Nexus, I'm proud to say that I rather accurately predicted what would happen after about 10 years of a totally unstable institutional arrangement. I said it will be fine, it will seem fine, but then it will degenerate, because you can't have a monetary union without any kind of fiscal union to compensate for differentials in productivity. This was correct. And now what do we see? Not the gentle decline of the European Monetary Union. No, we see its collapse happening with breathtaking speed. Italy was fine just a few weeks ago, and then suddenly not fine. Not 3.5%, but 7.5% borrowing costs. Death spirals happen in history, ladies and gentlemen. That's what makes history exciting. But I am here tonight to tell you that the United States must avoid that fate. We must avoid the death spiral. We need to delete the viruses, update the software, get the killer apps to work again, and reboot this country's machine before it's too late.